Hey, welcome. So, have you ever thought about this whole science versus God debate? Is it this epic, timeless war? Or what if that entire story is a modern invention? That's what we're digging into today. We're looking at a source with a pretty bold claim about where this whole conflict idea actually started.
All right, let's just jump right in. You hear this all the time, right? Christians are science deniers. It's a pretty heavy charge, and it just kind of assumes that science and faith are automatically at odds. But has it always been like this? Was that always the assumption?
Okay, to really get a handle on where we are today, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, because the source we're looking at claims this whole warfare narrative, it's not some ancient historical fact. It's actually something that was cooked up and way more recently than you might think.
And this is the big idea we're tackling, what historians actually call the warfare model. It's the story most of us just absorb by default, that from the days of Galileo right up through Darwin, it's just been this nonstop, knockdown, drag-out fight.
But here's where our source throws a real curveball. It argues that this entire warfare model, it's a myth. It's basically revisionist history. The claim is that the real story, the actual relationship, was something else entirely.
So if it wasn't a war, then what was it? Let's get into the counter-history that our source lays out, because the argument here is pretty wild, that far from being enemies, faith was actually, you could say, the very soil that modern science sprouted from.
Okay, now take a look at these names. I mean, wow. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Isaac Newton, Boyle, these guys are the absolute rock stars of the scientific revolution, right? But here's the kicker. According to our source, they weren't just brilliant scientists. They were also deeply religious men who believed their science was a form of worship, a way to figure out how God's creation worked.
And this gets right to the heart of why they did what they did. The source claims these pioneers had a fundamental belief: the universe makes sense, it's orderly, it's understandable, precisely because a rational creator made it. I mean, think about it. That belief, the argument goes, is what gave them the green light, the confidence to even try to investigate the cosmos in the first place.
Okay, so if the pioneers of science saw it that way, where did this whole conflict story even come from? Well, the source points to a specific moment in time when everything changed, a huge shift that happened much, much later, in the 1800s. And wow, this slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? You go from the founder's view, where nature is a reflection of a rational mind, to this brand new 19th century idea that, nope, it's a war between science and religion. They're mortal enemies now. It's a total 180. So who's responsible for this new narrative? Well, the source points a finger at a few key players. First, you had some very influential historians who basically went back and rewrote the past to look like a conflict. Then you get these powerhouse thinkers like Darwin, Marx, and Freud. Their theories gave people a way to explain the world that, well, it didn't need a creator anymore. And then you have the modern popularizers, the so-called new atheists, who've really cemented this warfare idea in our culture today. All right, let's hit the fast-forward button and jump from history to right now. The source argues this debate is anything but dead. In fact, it's supposedly raging, especially in biology, where some new discoveries are said to be shaking up that purely materialistic worldview. So here's a really crucial point the source makes. It claims that even though you hear the word consensus thrown around a lot in public, behind the scenes, there's actually a pretty spirited debate happening among scientists. The suggestion is that saying the science is settled can sometimes be a way to shut down any tricky questions about whether things like natural selection really have all the creative power we think they do. And check out this quote from Bill Gates, of all people. It's used to really drive this next point home. The idea is this: when you get down to the absolute bedrock of life at the level of DNA, you don't just find stuff, matter and energy. You find what looks, for all the world, like a sophisticated software program. You find information. So, okay, how do you get from that to an argument for design? Well, the source breaks it down into a pretty simple logical chain. Step 1, you look at DNA and you find complex digital code. Step 2, you ask yourself, in my entire experience of the world, where does software code come from? And the answer is always a programmer, an intelligent mind. So step 3 is the conclusion they draw, that the code in DNA must also point back to an intelligent mind. And it's really important to note, the source is careful to frame this as a scientific inference, not just a leap of faith. The claim is that this is the same kind of reasoning that, say, an archaeologist or forensic scientist uses every day. You look at the evidence in the present to figure out the best explanation for what happened in the past, based on what we know about cause and effect. Now, once you start down this road in biology, it naturally opens up a much bigger can of worms. You start asking even more fundamental questions, not just about how life is designed, but how did life even get started? And for that matter, where did the whole universe come from? And this is a really, really critical point. The source emphasizes that Darwin's origin of species was about how life changes, how you get new species from life that already exists. But what it didn't do, what it never even tried to do, was explain how you get that very first spark of life from non-life. And that leap? Going from a bunch of non-living chemicals to the incredibly complex, information-packed machinery of a living cell, that's described as one of the great unsolved mysteries in science. The source argues that this jump from just basic chemistry to something with digital code is a massive puzzle that materialism, the idea that matter and energy are the whole show, just hasn't figured out yet. So, if you're faced with what looks like design, what are your options? What could the explanation be? The source lays out two big ones that get talked about. The first one is pretty sci-fi. Maybe advanced aliens came here and seeded life on Earth. The other is what's called the God hypothesis, the idea that a transcendent, intelligent mind is behind it all. Okay, so which one makes more sense? Well, the source argues that the God hypothesis actually explains more. Why? Think about it. The alien idea just kicks the can down the road, right? Where did the aliens come from? The argument is that a transcendent mind doesn't just explain life here on Earth, it can explain the entire universe that those aliens would have to live in too. And that, of course, leaves us with the ultimate question of them all. According to the source, yeah, maybe an alien designer could explain life on our little planet, but it can't explain the cosmos itself. The argument we've unpacked today ultimately concludes that only something outside of nature, a transcendent cause, a mind, could possibly do that. And that, well, that's a pretty profound thought to chew on.